Hello, this is Amy Laura Hall, and this is a small, short lecture on my understanding of doing a close reading of a document. If you are watching this video and you have not already seen my short video about reading an image, of close reading of an image, please watch that video first. I've found that for many people who are trying to learn how to do a close reading, starting with a close reading of an image is easier than moving straight to a text. So I would suggest watching that video first, but I want to give some basic instructions for writing a close reading of a document. This is not going to be exhaustive, but it will be helpful for students who are taking a class with me who are going to be writing a close reading, doing a close reading of a text. I've chosen texts that are not currently on my syllabi but have been on my syllabi in the past, and I'll start with Gunfighter Nation. Gunfighter Nation, The Myth of the Frontier in 20th Century America by Richard Slotkin. So we could do a whole close reading of the cover, the image on the cover. We could do a close reading of the word myth. Why did Richard Slotkin choose the word myth? One way to think about this when you're writing a close reading is think about why this word and not a different word. So why myth instead of the story of the frontier in 20th century America? So why the myth of the frontier? One of the first things you're going to need to do when you're thinking through writing a close reading is you're going to need to read the text assigned and write for yourself little notations, or write for yourself, type for yourself notations about words that you do not know the meaning of, words that you find confusing, words that you don't understand why the author used that word. That's the best way to begin a close reading, is as you're reading, don't be looking for a word that's going to help you write a paper. Note for yourself words that you find interesting, confusing, befuddling. Better to do that initial read through than reading for how do I find a word that will allow me to write an essay. A close reading is not a full-on academic essay. You will not be writing an introductory paragraph and a concluding paragraph. For most of my classes, your close readings are going to be too short for it to be a full-on essay. You're doing a reading of one word or one phrase in the text assigned. Okay, I'm realizing I should take off my glasses when I'm just looking at the screen. So I can explain at length why I assign for students close readings, but at this point, I'm just going to have to ask you to trust me. I will be explaining throughout my classes as I'm teaching. I will explain to you why we are doing close readings. But I can give you very basically, the authors that I choose to assign for a class are authors who I think warrant close attention to the particular words that they've chosen for their book or for their essay. And I found that many times over the years, 21 years of teaching at Duke, that students come in ready to assess the argument of an essay, eager to figure out what's wrong with the person's words that they're reading, eager to show that they're smart by driving a wedge between the text and figuring out how to show that they have the cutting edge skills to dissect a text. That's not what we're doing with a close reading. With a close reading, you're starting with the assumption that the person whose text you're reading has something to teach you positively. Every once in a while, I will assign a text that we're going to be reading negatively, but most of the texts I assign, we're reading them for the author's own best words. You're not trying to figure out a way that the author has messed up. You're trying to figure out a way to learn from the author. And in classes, what will happen is that students will choose very different words or phrases on which to focus for their close reading, and then students will be able to explain to other students what they found, what they discovered when they looked in the Oxford English Dictionary about the meaning of a word. They will have things to teach one another because they've done the weekly work of doing a close reading, a close analysis of a word or phrase in an author's text. Okay, and I've learned over the years this is the best way to facilitate a genuine conversation about a text, with the text being at the center of the conversation. Yeah, okay, so if we were going to go back to Gunfighter Nation, I could just turn to a page here. I do not have a page marked. It's like a magician. Here I am. I'm a magician. I'm going to open up any place in the book. Okay, here we go. I just happened to go to page 398. Okay, I'm going to have to go back a little bit because I'm interested in. Okay, so this is a section. This is a chapter, and the chapter, it looks like it's called Killer Elite. The chapter is called Killer Elite, and the section in this chapter is called A Good Man with a Gun, Shane, 1953. So this is Richard Slotkin's close reading of a movie called Shane that came out in 1953. So I'm going to pick just a sentence here. I'll start with the first sentence of this section. This principle is rendered as an aphorism or slogan in one of the most successful westerns of the 1950s, George Stevens's Shane. In response to the redemptive woman's wish that all guns and violence be banished from the valley, Shane replies, and this is a quote from the film, "A gun is just a tool, Marion. It's as good or as bad as the man that uses it." Okay, so I'm not going to continue reading the whole paragraph out loud. Here would be some words I would choose if I were going to write a close reading of this section of Richard Slotkin's book. I would think banished. He used the word banished. A redemptive woman's wish, this is Slotkin's words, this isn't a quote from the movie, that all guns and violence be banished from the valley. Why did Richard Slotkin use the word banished? He could have used a different word. He could have structured this sentence differently. But banished, that word, what I would do next is I would look up the word banished in the Oxford English Dictionary, which you have available as if you're a Duke student, and actually if you're a student at any university with a library, at any school with a library, they will have Oxford English Dictionary available many times. And if you don't, then you'll be able to find another dictionary that will be helpful. But the Oxford English Dictionary will help me know more about the etymology of this word. It will help me know where this word came from, what the connotations are of this word. And I would then think through what is Richard Slotkin, what image is he evoking by using the word banished in that sentence? Also, it's interesting, you could think through, this would be for a 2 or 3 page close reading of this chapter in Richard Slotkin's book. Why does he say an aphorism or slogan? It's interesting. That's it's interesting to me that he uses both of those words, an aphorism or slogan. So he's trying to convey not two different things, but two related but distinct things. So it would be interesting to go and think about those two words and what was going on, that why did Slotkin use these two words in this one sentence. Okay, I could do a whole really fun lecture on that book, but I'm trying to teach a method, so I'm going to stop. Oh, all right. So I will now move to a work of fiction, and I'll just pick up, you know what? I'll pick up Beloved. Okay. So this is a novel by Toni Morrison, for which this is the one that she won a didn't she win the Pulitzer? Yeah, she won the Pulitzer for Beloved. The book of Toni Morrison's that I most often teach is The Bluest Eye, but I also have taught Beloved. So Beloved, which is a novel, a work of fiction by Toni Morrison. If I were going to just turn to any page here, I'm not gonna choose one of the pages that I have turned down to make sure. You know, in class we do close readings together of a certain passage, but I'm just going to open to any page. Let's see. Okay, so walking toward the stream beyond her green bush house, she let herself wonder what if Beloved really decided to choke her mother. Would she let it happen? Murder, Nelson Lord had said. Didn't your mother get locked away for murder? Wasn't you in there with her when she went? So this would be a helpful way for me to explain what a close reading is not. So one of the ways to do a close reading of a work of fiction or a work of nonfiction, Richard Slotkin's doing a close reading of, in that section, a work of fiction, the movie Shane. In this is a section of a book of fiction. One way to begin a close reading of a work of fiction or an image is to think about the color that the author has chosen. So the way that the author in a book uses the color green in this particular section of Beloved. So here's how not to do a close reading of a color in a novel. And I have had students in the past who struggled with avoiding this. So one way of writing an essay on an author's use of of an image like the color green here in this case, would be to say, so this is how not to do a close reading, okay? Would be to say the color green evokes in human beings a sense of vibrancy and spring. No, don't do that. Because what you've done is you've jumped out of Toni Morrison's text and you've tried to connect Toni Morrison's very particular text to some supposedly universal experience of the color green. The color green will mean very different things in different contexts. Do not try to say something universally meaningful about all humans by jumping from the text that we're reading for the class into some color analysis of human beings everywhere. So that would not be a close reading. That would be using someone else's words as a jumping off point to talk about, I don't know, everyone's experience of the color green. I understand you will take classes where people will tell you that there are universal experiences across every single culture and every single time. I don't believe that that's true. And so I don't teach that way. I ask you to think about the particulars of a particular author's text. So what you would need to do instead of the color green represents something everywhere is to think about what the color green means in this one sentence in this one section. So what you would do is you would move out, you think about green bush house, that phrase, and think about why the color green in that one section. Why does she include that detail? What does it help you understand about this one section, about these particular characters in this one book? Okay, I'm going to pull a few more out. I'll try one that's maybe a little fun, although I find reading texts of all kinds really fun. But here is Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, which is not a book I've taught yet, but I would love to figure out a way to get a chance to teach this book. But Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim is one that I read to both my daughters when they were little. And this is a Newbery Medal winning book by Robert C. O'Brien, and I recommend it. Okay, I'm going to open to any page. I mean, madame, that there is a way that your son's life might just possibly be saved. I did not mention it to you because I saw no way you could conceivably do it, and I do not want to arouse false hope. But if you are Jonathan Frisbee's widow, then perhaps it can be done. I don't understand at all, said Mrs. Frisbee. What is this thing? It is not a thing that I can do myself. You must go to the rats. Okay, this is a conversation. They actually have a really lovely little illustration here. This is a conversation between the owl and Mrs. Frisbee. So here, and for some of you, you might be thinking, like, why would you do a close reading of a children's book? There are multiple different reasons. If you want to watch an author who's really capable of choosing their words carefully, find a good children's author, because they have to tell a good story. They don't have people assigning their text. If you're writing a textbook, you don't necessarily have to write a really good textbook. But if you're trying to elicit interest from children who could be outside playing instead of sitting and listening to words that you've written, you've got to choose your words well and think through how the sentence structure is going to pull a child into a conversation like the one between an owl, who, by the way, owls eat mice, and Mrs. Frisbee, who is herself a mouse. All right. Here it'd be fun to think about why Robert C. O'Brien chose to use put in the owl's sentence, as Mrs. Frisbee says, "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, madame, that there is a way that your son's life might just possibly be saved." Okay, what has he conveyed? What is the author conveyed to us by putting the word madame in the owl's mouth? Like, what does it mean? What if he had called her instead my dear? My dear. My dear would be different than madame. So I would think through why the word madame, and what other words could he have used that would have connoted, that would have evoked a different kind of sense of the conversation that's happening between these two characters in the book. So that would be where I would go in that sentence if I were going to choose a word that I'm curious about, that I want to think about more closely. Now, you'll hopefully hear that I'm asking you not to find a word that you're like, well, that's obvious. This is a really good word for me to write an essay on because it is a big word or a really important word. For close readings, it's much better if you pick a word you're curious about that you don't know the answer to. And the ending of your close reading, at the end of 3 or 4 pages, at the end of 5 pages, heck, there are people who've written 20-page dissertations where at the end, what you have are well-informed questions, better informed questions about your chosen word and the author's use of that word. So you do not want to try to find a word for which you can write a conclusive, clear, this is obviously the case. It'll be much more fun and helpful to your colleagues in class if you've discovered something new for you about the word that you've chosen in the text that we've assigned, that we're sharing in the class. All right. Okay. So I'm going to now move to another work of nonfiction. This is another text that I've taught in the past, Womanist Ethics and the Cultural Production of Evil by Emily M. Towns. And I'm going to open to any page here. Okay, so this is her chapter called Invisible Things Spoken. And in this section, she has the words, this is the subheading for this chapter, Emasculating Sapphire. So this is one of the subheadings in this chapter. Emasculating Sapphire. And before she starts this section of her chapter, Emily Towns has given the reader a reminder. Sapphire is also a precious stone. One way to do a close reading of this section would be to think through, what is Emily Towns doing with a reminder here for her reader? Emasculating sapphire, reminder. Sapphire is also a precious stone. In a way, what she has done here is she's giving a reader a prompt to read closely and to think about the word sapphire as they're reading through her section on emasculating sapphire. All right, I'm going to find another section of this book. I highly, highly recommend this book as well. This is a chapter from Womanist Ethics and the Cultural Production of Evil by Emily Towns, a section, The Tragic Mulatta Stereotype as Legend. And here, a word that is a big word to consider but could be helpful if you're not used to thinking about how stories become more than stories, how patterns of stories within a culture, within culture production, how stories can become a kind of cultural production of a pattern of thinking about a group of people. But be careful, because I found that maybe perhaps because my classes are labeled as ethics, I will have a student periodically, well, frequently, read a text and find something that they think really matters in the world, and they'll use someone like Emily Towns. They will use Emily Towns's words as a way of moving out of her text, out of the specificity of her text and her particular words, the particular stories that she's drawing from, and use her words to tell your own story or to tell a story that you really want people to know. You can do that. That's important to do, but not before doing a close reading of her words and her particular examples. So for a closed reading analysis for one of my classes, you're going to need to stay within the particular text that I've assigned for all of us to read together in a class. And on this particular page, I would be thinking about, it would be okay, actually, even though it's a big word, it would be okay for a student to think about why she's used the word legend. It could be that if you're not used to thinking about how stories become patterns that aren't just incidentally told, but that people have made into a legend, it could be really helpful to do a big word like that. Big meaning thematic. A thematic word that you think like, do I really know what she means by legend? You've read over that word, but do you know why she chose that word and what that word means in the book that she's written on the cultural production of evil? Okay. I have two other books here. You know, I'm going to say a few general things again about doing close readings. So one reason to do close readings in a class is that it helps to avoid a type of conversation that happens in many academic settings, especially in philosophy, theology, ethics. It may be that in cultural theory that happens too, where you'll have a student in class who figures out what the professor is really interested in, and you'll have some sort of conversation that goes on between the professor and a particular student. Sometimes it'll be a professor and a few other students, where the student and the professor have left the classroom and are now talking about something else that not everybody read. And I could give you many, many examples in my classes when I've had to really resist that happening. It's not helpful for the other students, for the professor to be having a conversation about something that wasn't even a text assigned in the class. It can be helpful as an aside, sometimes in an explanatory way, to help explain something for the rest of the students, but it's often very obnoxious when that happens in a seminar. So I have found that having a text that we've all read together that has something to teach us, having a book in the room that has something to teach us, will mean that we will all literally, well, and sometimes with an electronic version, but still, we will all be on the same page. We will not be somewhere else on a different, in a different time zone, somewhere not in the room thinking about what's going on the page together. One of my former students, his friend, she was a friend before she was a student, Susan Maurice Brubaker, and Sarah Maurice, she had a fabulous song that she made up about at Duke Divinity School that there for a long time, if you hadn't read the book assigned for the class, it was safe to drop a word about Alistair McIntyre. So Alistair McIntyre could not be assigned in the class at all. She wrote this whole song that was fabulous about when you haven't done the reading, you could say, well, Alistair McIntyre said, and then you would be able to be in on the in because you'd mentioned Alistair McIntyre. I am sure there are other authors now at Duke Divinity School, not authors at Duke Divinity School, but authors that could help you get away with not doing the reading and just, are not understanding the reading and bring up a name and then you're in on the in. But that's not how I teach. I don't find that to be a very helpful way of teaching. And I highly recommend when you're doing a close reading, stick with the text. Do not try to impress me with your knowledge of something outside of the text. I want you to write a close reading so you learn something new from the author that I've assigned that you're then able to bring to the class. And what that new thing might be is a question that you have. Okay, here's a way that my advice has gone wrong. you're going to have to take time doing a close reading. So I've had some close readings where I'll get a paper, it'll be a 3-page paper. I wonder why this author used the word, I'll just choose something, orange. Used the color orange in this passage. I'm curious about why the author chose the color orange. I wonder if the author has things to say about the image in this section. And it's kind of like, that's not a close reading. That's just a series of questions that you didn't actually follow up to find out something about. So if you're curious about the color orange in an author's sentence, and that's what you're going to focus on, look up interviews with that author, see what that author said that connects to your choice of words. And if you can't find anything, and you've spent several hours on your 3 to 4, 2 to 3 page close reading, you can at the end say, I chose a word that I don't understand why the author chose this word, and I've done my research and I chose a bad word this week. That happens, and it's not a disaster when it happens, but it's not really fair when I'm spending more time helping you correct your paper than you spent writing your paper. So please do the research. Use the Oxford English Dictionary. That's your best go-to for thinking about the origins of a word, and you will find your own best way of writing a close reading. I do not have a recipe. I'm giving you the best recipe I can through video. You will also have a guide to close reading in your syllabus that I helped write along with Tom Robichaud, who's one of my colleagues here in the history department. I've included also his guide to close reading for historical documents. So you will have guides, you will have words, but you will also have your own best way of figuring out how to write a close reading. I do offer sample papers from previous classes, but the only thing, the big thing I want to say about those is that those are not templates for writing close readings. They're just examples, because students have written very different kinds of close readings. I've had students turn in diagrams where what they've done is they've done something visual with a word, because that's how their imaginations best work to think through an author's meaning in choosing a word. I've had students who have done it almost like a physics proof, where they've looked at particular other words that the author could have used, particular meanings and uses of the word, by going to the Oxford English Dictionary and looking those up, and then posed questions that they think would be helpful for thinking about this particular word in this particular passage. Okay, so what a close reading isn't. A close reading is not your response to a document. It is not your assessment of a document. So no need to begin your close reading as you're writing what you're going to turn into me. No need to tell me that Toni Morrison is a brilliant writer. I know that. That's why I assign her. So no need to say, give your own critical assessment of the text that I've assigned. That's superfluous. So it's not your response or your affirmation of a text. I assume that you're reading the text and that you assume that I know what I'm doing in assigning a text. It's also not a homily or a sermon. And I think for divinity students, this is a particular temptation, to use someone else's words to try to say something that you think would work in a pulpit or Sunday school class. Now, the non-divinity version of this is often an ethics argument. So I've had close reading. They're not close readings. I've had people turn in words that weren't close readings, but they thought was a close reading, where they have thought through the policy implications of an analysis of a movie like Shane in Gunfighter Nation. So I'll get a policy paper. That's not what a close reading is. It's an assessment of a policy change that would address the concerns about banishing guns and violence in the Valley in the movie Shane. So it's not a policy paper. It also, a close reading is not please don't, and this is in my guide to close reading that you're going to receive, it is not it's not your way of trying to say something that is universally true across any particular demographic. So if you find yourself typing something like generally human beings, no, don't do that. Generally women, what are you going to say? Generally women what? Like you're going to say something that applies to all women everywhere at all times? No, don't do that. So I have found that maybe through, I don't know exactly why people do this, but if you find yourself writing a sentence that tries to say something that is true across generations, unless you're looking at one particular family and you have a lot of space and you're going to be writing close detail about that family, don't try to say something across generations in a particular region even. I mean, I just heard somebody this morning. I can complain about this. Just heard a commentator this morning on, well, I don't remember, NPR. It was one of the NPR shows this morning, and they were talking about football and whether or not we're going to be playing football at college campuses during the pandemic. And I can't remember the man's name, but this commentator said, I've lived in the South for a lot years, and I have to tell you that in the South, football is a religion. And then went on to make sweeping generalizations about the South that I thought, wait, I come from football country and I understand what you're trying to say, but you're actually not saying something detailed and specific enough to be helpful to somebody who's wanting to learn something new and not just have their prejudices reinforced. It wasn't a close reading of football during the pandemic in a particular region. It was a sweeping generalization. And generally, those kinds of words pass for wisdom, depending on who's saying them, depending on the intonation and the gender of the person speaking. Okay, I've got lots more to say on this, but I need to cut this off so that you are not listening for a whole hour. You will be able to send me questions. I'll upload this also on Facebook, so people who are on Facebook who are curious about close readings can ask me questions, and I'll do my best to answer them over time. But for students, if you receive this and you're completely baffled, don't worry, I will help you. It's my job to teach you how to read texts and images closely. Sometime over the next 48 hours, I will create and download another video on how to do a close reading of a particular scene detail in a moving image. So in a film, a documentary, different forms of film, television. So I've got to figure out how to embed images from screenshots. Anyway, I've got to figure out some technology in the next 48 hours in order to be able to share that this way instead of in the classroom. But I will be doing that next. Thank you for listening.